Welcome to Up Late with Ben Northey 2022 edition, coming to you from my lounge room here in Melbourne. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land I'm on, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. So I think this is the first one of these we've done for the year and for quite some time. You know, Up Late with Ben Northey was always meant to be a lockdown-specific activity. And we are in the process at the MSO transferring Up Late with Ben Northey into a podcast. And I'm only slightly triggered by the fact that we're doing this again. You know, I kind of am going back in time a little bit, but I'll get over that. We'll do a couple more video presentations. I've got some guests coming up, including Meow Meow, Genevieve Lacey. I think they'll be our final video guests, and then we'll move into the podcast format sometime in the second half of the year with many more guests to meet and discover. So for those of you who've been to a few concerts, it's been a huge start to the year for the MSO. We really hit the ground running in 2022. We had a fabulous Maya Bowl series, Jaime Martin, our new chief conductor, his opening concerts, which were absolutely spectacular. Harry Potter was on a couple of weeks ago. We just had this big Korngold Symphony in F sharp last week. We're doing Disney's Fantasia this week at the Melbourne Convention Centre. And amazingly, as cellist and former guest on this show, Rowan DeCourt, has reminded the orchestra, we've had 10 uninterrupted weeks of concerts for the first time since March 2020. So long may that continue. So tonight's guest is a musician and a human that I have great admiration for. And just a reminder that you can put any questions you may have for our guest tonight into the chat window on YouTube, and I will get to them. And before I introduce him, I should also point out we're once again supported by our magnificent friends at Tarrawarra Estate. And I'm drinking this delicious Pinot Noir tonight. I actually gave up drinking for 2 months from February in the lead up to this Korngold Symphony in F sharp, which is a big commitment to make. I'm back with a vengeance. It's all good. Thank you, Tarrawarra, for keeping me going this week. But yes, a musician, a human I have great admiration for. His name is Aaron Wyatt, and Aaron is an accomplished violist. He's appeared regularly throughout the past decade as a casual musician with the West Australian Symphony Orchestra. I think that's where I first worked with you, Aaron. He's appeared as a soloist with the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, as a conductor earlier in the year. He's done heaps of things in music, which we'll gradually unpack. As a really broad range of interests in music and technology, which I'll ask him about tonight. But it's with great pleasure that I welcome you to Up Late with Ben Northey, Aaron Wyatt.
Thanks, Ben. It's great to be here.
How are you going? It's a pretty weird time in Melbourne, isn't it? As we kind of emerge from whatever the hell we just went through.
It is a weird time, but I'm really enjoying sort of getting out and about and actually, well, not only just doing gigs, but also getting to see other things that are being performed. And it's funny because there's sort of like a backlog of concerts and projects that have been put off for the past 2 years. I know just the other week I had the Summer's Night project run by Tour New Music. So this mentoring program for, I guess, well, not necessarily emerging, but for female or non-binary identifying composers. And that was something that was meant to happen in 2020. And of course got put back to 2021 and now finally happened in 2022. So sort of just trying to wrap up all these loose ends over the past.
It's kind of nice, isn't it, that people are honoring those commitments from back that far, you know. And there are things, as you say, that were postponed 3, 4, 5 times. You know, I mean, I said we're doing Disney's Fantasia next week. I think this is literally the 4th date we've had for that particular concert. But it has been wonderful to see things getting back to normal. I've been traveling again, which has been interesting. You know, I went to Adelaide for the Adelaide Festival and conducted some concerts, went to Sydney. And it's really interesting seeing how every city is in a different kind of phase of coming out of the lockdown. And, you know, even with things like mask use and all that kind of stuff. Have you been traveling around much, or have you been in Melbourne?
I have a bit. I also actually went to Adelaide during festival time. So quite a number of the Ensemble Dutala members went over to meet members of the Chineke
amazing
ensemble there.
There'll be some real common ground there, I imagine.
It was just fantastic to get to meet them, and really exciting. Looking forward to some potential projects with them in the future.
Oh, how exciting.
Mm.
Oh, they're a wonderful group. Well, that's a whole nother conversation. But look, people will know you from your appearance with Melbourne Symphony Orchestra as a soloist. Uh, that was last year. They'll also know you from your conducting debut with the orchestra this year, conducting Long Time Living Here of Deborah Cheetham at the Maya Music Bowl, which was an incredibly special time. And I'll ask you about that as well. But let's go back to your childhood growing up in Perth and your family. Tell me about growing up in Perth and how did you find music?
Yeah, so I guess I just had a sort of fairly typical middle class suburban upbringing. But we had friends who sort of had a piano at their place, and I was always sort of drawn to the instrument, just enjoyed playing around with it. Obviously, I was like 3 or 4 at this stage, had no sort of musical training whatsoever. And my parents listened to music, but they weren't particularly musical either. Um, but I really enjoyed the instrument, was really drawn to it, and so they decided to enroll me in some sort of like music appreciation classes for kids. Did really well at that, and they suggested that I learn an instrument. And of course, really wanted to learn piano, but my parents were a bit worried that I was so small that I wouldn't be able to navigate the keyboard, and they were like, "Well, violins come in small sizes, so let's do that." And I kind of just always stuck with that from there until I eventually switched to viola, sort of much further down the track, sort of in the transition between high school and university.
I can see
Um,
there's at least 176 keys of
oh,
piano in
there's
that room. That's clearly your music studio. Did you have a piano at
uh,
home? Was there a piano at home growing up?
we did eventually. Actually, it's funny because my brother eventually ended up learning piano, and so I was sort of a bit miffed about that. And he sort of I didn't continue on too far with it, but we did have a piano around, so I was able. I've kind of taught myself bits of piano pieces, and I can sort of hack my way through the odd bits of Debussy preludes, or at least some of the easier ones.
Yep.
But never had any sort of formal keyboard training, just all
Yeah.
strings.
Well, so how did you get into music? Were you at a school that had a good music program? Did you have good teachers that kind of nurtured your interest in it?
In primary school, I actually did. And I went to a couple of different schools, and the second one in particular, Creaney Primary, had a really amazing music program. But it was
Yep.
sort of that school band related thing. So obviously, no violins in the ensemble. So I
Yeah.
sort of took up clarinet just for year 6 and 7 to play in the band, and that was a lot of fun. Sort of continued on a bit into high school, but then as things were getting well, I mean, I wasn't exactly the most studious person when it came to practice anyway. So it's like if I'm gonna have to practice, I'll just practice the one instrument. And I've been doing violin for longer, and I'm much further along in that. And
Yeah.
but mostly, I guess most of it was outside of the school system. So I had private lessons, and then I can't remember how old I was at the time, but it would have been in primary school. I sort of joined one of the junior ensembles of the WA Youth Orchestra,
Oh,
and
yeah.
kind of just ended up. So they're back in that stage. There were like I think 3 string ensembles and then one senior orchestra. Now
Yep.
there's sort of the senior WAO and then philharmonic, and then I'm not sure how many string ensembles they have these days, but it's a huge
It's a
organization now.
fabulous program, isn't it? They
Oh, it
do
really
such
is.
good work. I've loved working with them the few
Mm.
times I've had the chance. It's been very special.
Yeah, and so I kind of just grew up through the youth orchestra system and had. I mean, I've got friends still to this day who I'm still in touch with who I just sort of grew up with through there. So, back then it was as much a social thing as it was a musical thing.
Yeah.
I'd never intended to do music as a career. And so
Mm.
it was just something really fun to do.
Yeah. So you were interested in science and engineering, though, weren't you? And you kind of still have that interest in the tech side of music, which we'll get to a bit later. But that's what you studied initially at university, wasn't it? You studied
Yes.
science and engineering degree.
Yeah. So I started in a sort of double degree in biomedical science and electronic engineering. And
Yeah.
so I only did a year of that before I switched to music. Not
Yep.
because I mean, I enjoyed it. Um, and, I was doing fairly well at it, but I just couldn't see myself. I mean, the sort of stuff that I would have wanted to do afterwards would have been more like research kind of
Mm.
work. And back then, I really was not great at writing up lab reports, and I was just really. not the most motivated student at times. And it's like, well, if I have to choose between writing up lab reports or practicing, I'll
Yeah.
just practice.
Lesser of two
And of
evils.
course, ironically, now I'm working at a university and I'm doing my PhD, and it's like, well, clearly that didn't turn out the way I
What are
expected.
you
But
what are you doing your PhD in now?
so the PhD is in animated graphic notation sort of stuff. So
Yep.
it's there's a piece of software that I developed for the iPad called the Decibel Score Player,
Yep.
which yeah, it's to sort of coordinate these animated graphic notation scores. And the most basic sort is like basically a long image that
Yep.
scrolls past a playhead, and each of the musicians reads their part as it hits the playhead. So it's really useful to coordinate, music that doesn't have a traditional sense of pulse or rhythm.
Yep.
So very sort of long durational works, a lot of sort of pieces based on long drones or glissandi. And so in
Yeah.
fact, it came out of the practice of like the Decibel New Music Ensemble. So a lot of Kat Hope's pieces actually had very clear ideas about what she wanted
Yeah. So
structural
Kat
pieces
Hope,
to
for those
be.
people who don't know her, great composer
Mm,
and somebody who is really innovative in her approach to composition. And you've worked with her closely, haven't you? You conducted her opera Speechless,
I did.
which was a huge success. And you've worked a lot with Decibel, obviously, this new music ensemble, and toured extensively with them as well. And so, where are you at in the development of this Decibel notation software? Like, is it
So
sort of
it's yeah,
nearly
it's kind of
done?
at version 2.0 at the moment. So
Okay.
it's sort of the PhD is looking at, I guess, some of the more recent developments and seeing how far we can extend it, and ways that we can, I guess, increase the range of things that composers can do, and also improve the user experience for performers as well.
Yeah.
So one of the most recent features we added, for instance, was being able to write on it just as you would any sort of normal score, so that
Yeah.
you can annotate your parts.
I
And
see. Yeah.
yeah, I guess giving performers a similar experience to what they would be used to with traditional sort of paper scores.
Is that something you were always interested in, that intersection between technology and music, or is it something that you developed an interest in over time?
No, it was definitely something that I was always interested in, but I think before
Mm,
I got involved in the Score Player project, it wasn't something that I was quite as involved in,
yeah,
in terms of actually creating more concrete projects.
yeah. Well, you've got a really broad, eclectic musical range of influences, and just looking through your bio, I was seeing. I mean, we'll talk about your time in WASO separately as a professional violist, but you've also performed in a number of fringe and festival shows, including the award-winning City of Shadows,
Mm.
which went on to perform seasons in New York and Melbourne. Tell us about that. What was that show?
It was such a fantastic project, and especially playing in the New York Fringe was just a real highlight.
I
Um,
bet.
so it was a work by Rachel Deese, and it was based on this book, City of Shadows.
Mm,
So back in sort of maybe it was in the 70s or 80s. I'd have to double check, but there was this warehouse in, I think it was in Sydney, that sort of flooded, and they sort of rescued all this material from it, and it was all this sort of old police material. So all these old police photos and the like from like the 20s and 30s in Sydney. And so there are these amazing sort of black and white sepia tone pictures and images, all sorts of ones that just are sort of lineups, pictures of accidents, pictures of crime scenes. So you know, from the mundane everyday to sort of these really quite dark images.
yeah.
And so Rachel Deese wrote a song cycle to it, and we had a quartet. So myself, Tristan Parr, Brian Kruger, and Haley Ayres, and we kind of, as a group, helped to put together the parts. I mean, there was a lot of improvisation within it as well,
Yeah.
and as I said, there were just these hauntingly beautiful images set to with Rachel's hauntingly beautiful score.
Mm,
And that won the inaugural Martin Sims Award at the Perth Fringe Festival. So it was sort of $10,000 for a tour ready show.
yeah.
Uh, so that's what got us to New York. And
Wow.
it was just, and the great thing was, it was the sort of first year that the Fringe Festival had really started to kick back up in Perth, because,
Mm,
hadn't happened for a long time. And most of the most of the shows were set in the old Treasury building, which has now been done up, and it's like all restaurants and a hotel, and it's
A very
very fancy.
expensive
It's
hotel.
a very expensive hotel.
I did get to stay there one time when WASO had a sponsorship deal with them. I
Oh,
felt very
nice.
special.
Yeah, I have not stayed there yet, but it's yeah, very nice place. But back then, it was this rundown old government building, and you'd walk into some of the backstage rooms, and you could just like look through the floor because there's like a missing floorboard or something. And
Wow.
there were rooms that you couldn't go into because it was just like not safe. And it's like, so these rooms aren't safe, but this one with the hole in the floor is. I hate to see
Yeah,
what
yeah,
condition
right.
these are in, but you know, with that background of this sort of slightly decaying old government building with this high sort of glass ceilings and the
Yeah.
sort of balcony around the edges, it was just really the perfect venue for it.
It must have been a fascinating experience going to New York as well. Was that your first kind of artistic trip to New York or to America, or had you been before that?
Yeah, it was. I'd been to the
Mm,
US before
yeah,
briefly, but this was the first time taking a show there. I'd been
yeah,
to Europe a number of times, but
yeah,
first time in New York, and it was just such a fun experience, especially going with the group of people. You know, we're such
yeah,
a close knit group as
yeah,
quartet plus Rachel, and then we had a couple of fringe production people there as well.
yeah,
And I mean, it's such a luxury having sort of one show a night and like 40 minutes for a show. So we had a
yeah,
10-day period there, 4 days to acclimatize and
mm,
get used to the time difference, and then like a 40-minute show a night, and the rest of the time was ours. So
yeah,
we did a lot of like we went out to Coney Island as a group, and you know, hit the amusement park there and the boardwalk, and went to see MoMA. I got to
yeah.
see Book of Mormon on Broadway, so just, you know, really got to get a real taste for New York.
It's an amazing city, isn't it? So
Mm,
inspiring. I always say if I didn't live in Melbourne, I'd probably live in New York. Uh, but look, let's talk about WASO because that's
mm.
a very I'm sure, formative time in your professional life as well. So this is after you finish uni, you win a casual audition and start working with the West Australian Symphony Orchestra as a section violist.
Yep.
And how long did you do that for?
I think it was just over 11 years
Yes,
in
that's
the end
quite a
before I,
big
yeah,
chunk of time.
it was a
Yeah. So
long
what
chunk of
what was
time.
that like? Tell me about that.
I was great. It was really quite nerve wracking at first because, of course, it's a big difference between, you know, even like the AYO, the National Youth
Sure.
Orchestra, and moving up
Yeah.
into a professional orchestra.
Totally.
So a bit overwhelming at first, especially because so a friend of mine, Kathy Potter, and I auditioned at the same time. And we auditioned because actually they were really short on violas, and they asked us to do a couple of weeks' work before we'd auditioned,
Yeah.
and then we had to, you know, do the audition to formalize things and actually get ongoing work, which was slightly nerve wracking because it's like, well, if I screw up the audition now, having played for 2 weeks, this is just going to be embarrassing. But
Yeah.
it was all fine, thankfully. And so because I guess because Wazo spends a lot of time in the pit with the opera and
Yeah.
ballet seasons, they don't have enough strings. They don't have a full string section for the bigger Masters of
Mm.
Classics concerts. So both Kathy and I, over actually the past decade or so, did a lot of regular work with them during the classics and the Masters concerts. So
Yeah.
played some really massive repertoire, and we both got to, you know, go on the China and Abu Dhabi tour,
Yeah.
and yeah, no, just a lot of regular work, playing through some really amazing repertoire.
We haven't really talked about your Indigenous heritage, because I don't think it's actually, something that we need to address as such. But I am interested by how many other musicians you came across in that orchestral world who had an Indigenous heritage, because that seems to be quite rare to me.
Yeah, it's a very low number. So I mean, basically, in my whole time in Perth, it was just me. Um,
Yeah,
and the great thing now is that so Deborah's started this project. Deborah Cheatham, I should say,
yeah,
has started this project Ensemble Dutala, which is kind of, I guess it's like an instrumental version of the sort of work that she was doing in short black opera to
yeah,
sort of give a voice to Indigenous opera singers. So this is really trying to find Indigenous and Torres Strait Islander classical musicians from around the country to get together and play together in an ensemble.
yeah,
And it was quite surprising actually. One of the members of the ensemble, Rosie Savage, is a horn player from Melbourne, and I'd met her years ago at an Australian Youth Orchestra season. I had no idea that she was also Indigenous, and so it was only all these years later when I sort of ran into her again in Ensemble Dutala that it's like, oh, cool, awesome. There's
Isn't that amazing?
another sort of Indigenous musician who's actually playing with various state and professional orchestras.
Yeah. I'll let you have a sip of your wine, Aaron.
Mm.
What have they given you? Is that the
It's their Chardonnay actually.
Chardonnay? It's very nice, isn't it?
It's very nice. I'm
Yeah.
usually more of a red person, but this is going down very,
Yeah.
very easily.
Yes, well, I do like my Pinot Noir, I have to
Mm.
say, and they make a very, very nice Pinot. God bless those people at Tarrawara Estate. So, in terms of your instrumental career, I mean, this we're talking about Ensemble Dutala. You're conducting that group now, and
Yep,
so
yep.
that's something though that you've actually done quite a lot of. That was another thing that I noticed in your, and I know you and I have obviously spent some time talking about the future and your potential as a conductor, which I think is immense. But how did you get into conducting initially? Tell us about how that worked. Was that something at uni or was it after that? How did it
Yeah,
happen?
it was something at uni. So it was back then when I was at uni. I think initially it was its own separate sort of course, its own separate unit. But by
Mm,
the time I got to sort of third and fourth year, it had been sort of just rolled into the performance. Like these performance units became sort of this big monolithic beast with all sorts of little subunits to them, and it was kind of part of that. And but thankfully, at least that meant it still stuck around as an elective, where it might have otherwise gotten the chop,
yeah.
you know, with the way that university departments sometimes work.
Mm,
Um, but that was, Peter Moore was taking that,
yeah.
and it was basically, I mean, just an introductory course to conducting. You'd sort of get up. We'd have, an ensemble made out of people in the class.
Mm,
You just conduct these small arrangements,
yeah.
and yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed it, and thought I could see myself doing more of this.
Yeah.
And so from then, like after that ended, I sort of found out there was a community orchestra, which is just a very small, very beginner sort of community orchestra looking
Mm,
for a conductor, which is the Churchlands Community Orchestra, and did a couple of seasons with them, and then sort of got asked to do. So some of the schools that I taught at, I ended up taking things like the chamber ensemble, took a number of the musicals
yeah.
at both Christchurch and Iona,
Mm,
um, and then eventually as well got asked to be musical director of another community orchestra, the Southside Symphony Orchestra, which is
yes.
they're just such a fun group of people, and
Mm,
they were really just an absolute pleasure to work with.
mm,
We did some amazing repertoire and some really, they weren't afraid to do interesting things, and
yeah.
so we had, they'd do flash mobs. Actually, a particularly awesome flash mob that we did with them was sort of a Star Wars flash mob at the Fiona Stanley Hospital, and managed to get members of the I think 501st Legion involved.
Oh,
So
fantastic.
yeah, always, which is always great for a community gig like that. Taking
Totally.
music into sort of that sort of hospital environment,
Yeah.
um, and also doing we for community orchestra as well did a regional tour down to Williams, played in a woolshed down there.
Yeah.
Did a number of concerts in this sort of hangar at Serpentine Airfield. So there was a supporter of the orchestra who just happened to have a hangar down there, and
Mm,
once a year we'd clean it out. We'd basically have it there as a sound shell. I'd sort of fly in on a biplane and then conduct, and it was
yeah.
just a fun concert. And even to the point where one year we were very fortunate to get William Barton along to play with us. And I still remember the president of the orchestra, Irene, asking me, it's like, would we be interested in doing a work with William Barton? I was just like, yes, we would. Totally grab him. I can't believe we're lucky enough as a community orchestra to have such an amazing world-class soloist. So yes, we are interested.
Isn't that fantastic? I am interested in hearing what it's like working with Ensemble Dutala from that point of view. I mean, that must be. I mean, are you sort of aware of how special and profound that idea is? First and foremost, that idea of Deborah's
Oh,
um,
yeah,
to make that ensemble.
absolutely. I mean,
Mm,
and it is, it feels like it shouldn't matter that much, but representation really does
Totally.
ultimately matter.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. I mean, it's not like I ever had any sort of issues out in the professional world.
Mm,
The orchestra's generally a very welcoming bunch of people, and if you can play your instrument, then
sure.
they love having you there.
Yeah.
Um, but it's so nice to know that it's like there are other Indigenous performers out there
Mm,
in the classical world, and as I said, some like Rosie, playing at a level where they're also out and about doing gigs in
mm,
amongst professional orchestras. Some of the other members, I mean, we have members like Baden, who's quite a a good violinist, but music's not his main thing, and he's like a principal dancer with the Bangara Dance Company. And
yes.
we have other members who are doing all other manner of professional jobs, and they're doing really well what they do. And for them,
Mm,
music is something fun. It's something they really enjoy, but it's not something that they want to pursue as a career.
yeah,
But
sure.
it's still great to, even with that really wide variety of people. It's just great to be able to play together and know that there are others out there. And I think the really great thing about it is that there's a scholarship attached to it now. So
Mm,
we've just got our inaugural scholarship recipient, Jackson Worley, has just started cello at Monash Uni. So
fantastic.
he's someone who he joined us when he was in year 12. He's now studying at uni, and he's someone who could potentially, with enough practice and enough time, could end up in the profession as well. And it's I think the big role that the group has to play is in inspiring sort of this new generation of players that can potentially come through.
Yeah, this is very interesting to me
Mm.
because it speaks to the idea of purpose and the power of music to be an agent of change and improvement, and that's something that is easy to say, but there are so many people that believe so strongly in this exploration of the collaborations in First Nations kind of cultural areas. And Deborah Cheetham has been the MSO's First Nations Creative Chair and has really taken us on a great path of discovery for all of us who believe strongly in using music's power. What's your impression of how the orchestras specifically are kind of reaching out to try and be more active in that area? I mean, there's a lot of work being done, but what's actually your impression of what's happening?
I think there's a lot of great things happening. There's a lot of great initiatives going ahead. It's one of those things that I guess it's sort of probably a more recent phenomenon
Yes.
more than anything else. Um, but I think there are some really really positive things starting to happen, and
Yeah.
there's just, I think, greater awareness out there of all of these sorts of issues. Last year, for example, I was so incredibly lucky to get back to Perth, sort of between, well, actually, it was during a lockdown. Um, I managed to make it over to Perth just before Melbourne. I think the day I arrived, Melbourne was medium risk. The day
Wow.
after I arrived, it was high risk, and
Yeah.
then, but in the lead up to that, it was becoming increasingly obvious that there was no way I was going to make it across without doing 2 weeks of hotel quarantine and
Yeah.
getting extra time off uni, and which
Mm.
turned out I didn't need to do because uni stayed online because we were still locked down. So
Yeah,
I was
of
able to
course. Yeah.
teach from a hotel room, which was not the greatest thing, but was
Mm.
doable, and at least it was something to do during the days. But I was very fortunate to get over to Perth to conduct the premiere of Gina Williams and Guy Gauss's new opera, called Badi Wado.
Yeah.
So, this was an initiative by the WA Opera Company, so one of the major performing arts organisations,
Mm.
um, commissioning new work from Indigenous composers, and it's part of their youth focused series as well. So, in fact, the orchestra that played for it was WAO, so
Oh,
the
yeah.
more senior members of WAO, because it was
Yeah.
quite a small pit orchestra.
Yeah.
Just the strings, single winds, and then a jazz trio comprising like Guy Gauss, Danny Sassinger, and Nick Abbey. So just amazing players, and such a great
Yeah.
opportunity for the youth orchestra kids to work with them.
Yeah.
Um, but this was, a major performing arts organization just off their own back, reaching out to Indigenous artists saying, we want to support you to create work. like
Mm,
where, we'll help you and guide you, and really we want to bring your artistic vision to life. We don't want to sort
mm,
of impose anything on you.
yep.
And the work that arose from that was just such a magical work, and it was really, yeah, just a phenomenal experience having, as I said, an indigenous composer in Gina Williams, an entirely indigenous principal cast.
Mm,
The opera was entirely in Noongar, and once again having an indigenous conductor, which
yeah.
is once again not something that often happens with those projects.
Not often,
No,
Aaron.
in
Not
fact,
often.
not at all previously.
Yeah, well, that must have been a very special occasion at the Maya
Mm,
Music Bowl earlier this year.
mm.
Tell us about what that was like, because that'd be fascinating for people to hear from your perspective again, as to what that must have been like to conduct the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, to lead them in a piece written by Deborah Cheetham, our acknowledgement of country, long time living here. Tell us about that night.
Yeah, it was. It's kind of surreal actually, and it all just
Yeah.
went by very very quickly.
Yes.
Especially doesn't hurt that it's only a 3 minute piece, so that definitely meant it felt like I went through really quickly. But it's funny because, like, yeah, so often in interviews I've been asked, it's like, oh, what was it like? What was
Yeah.
sort of occasion? And it's like, well, actually, it's like it's as if they're expecting some grandiose poetic answer, but it's like, well,
Yes.
really, I was actually just focused on what I had to do to get
The
through the piece
music. Yeah.
and to get through the music and to make sure I gave the musicians what they needed to,
Yep.
because it's a very different acoustic there from Waki.
Totally. Not easy.
It
Yeah.
is not. So it's like, I think people want the really poetic answer, but really it's just like, well, I was just thinking of technically what I needed to do and how to shape
Yeah.
things and where the important phrases were and all that, and just really
Yep.
doing all the things that I need to do to
Yeah.
really try and bring the music to life.
Yeah. It's fascinating to me, this idea of, um, as I said before, not actually thinking primarily about the indigenous aspect
Mm,
to your work. I mean, it's obviously for everybody something that is so exciting and kind of intoxicating, for people to experience and to see happening. I
mm,
mean, and for something as kind of symbolic as a conductor, that's my kind of feeling about it, is that it's
mm,
just got an enormous power to inspire, and it's a really important kind of message. But also, in spite of the indigenous heritage is one thing, but you'd be ready to do it in any case. Your background is your foundations are so strong. You've got such a vast experience in classical music, and you're a very fine conductor, Aaron, I've got to say. I know.
thank you.
Yeah, I mean, was it something that you thought maybe going into earlier, or do you think maybe just now the time is right to do it?
It was, and one of the reasons that I moved to Melbourne and took up the job at Monash was because there would be greater opportunities, and yeah, which is kind of ironic in terms of, because I settled into the job and thought, okay, first year there, just getting used to the position. Then I'll worry about outside gigs and sort of starting to see what it was out there. And of course, at about that time, that was when the pandemic happened. And so suddenly
Mm,
everything just sort of stopped. And of course, meanwhile, back in Perth, like it was, as I was saying, going back there for the opera, it was like this bizarre land that time had forgotten, where just sort of
yes. Yeah.
they've gotten so lucky so many times over there. It's incredible. Not that I wish ill on them, but they've really managed to get away with a lot. Um, but so suddenly, all of these people who are sort of local conductors in Perth were
Yeah.
getting these opportunities that they would never have been, looked at for previously. But
Yes.
because they couldn't get people in from over east or overseas,
Yeah.
and a lot of this, it's one of those things that sort of remnants of the cultural cringe I think that we have in this country, in that
Mm,
unless you've gone overseas, over to Europe or the US, it's like, you can't know what you're talking about.
mm.
And then of course when you have a situation like that where, well, suddenly you have to get local people, and in fact they can easily step up to the plate because there's
It's
a lot
nice
of
to
local
see that,
talent.
yeah, that's endured as well.
Mm,
That their assistant conductor Jen Winley is conducting the orchestra. I think just last week or something. They had a situation where, um, they celebrated that local talent, and this is in a time of reopening. So
mm,
it's actually very encouraging, I think, to see. I mean, that also speaks to the idea of orchestras being more interested in these First Nations collaborations as well, because we're telling an Australian story. We're actually, the Australian identity is at the core of those projects. No, it wouldn't make that much sense culturally for other orchestras in Europe to do those concerts, at least initially. I'm really always happy to see that, because it means that we're kind of really identifying ourselves as Australian arts organizations that are exploring those big questions of
Yeah, no,
identity. I mean,
absolutely.
how do you think music? Well, what role can music play in our, or the arts maybe more broadly, in our reconciliation journey? Do you think here in Australia?
Yeah, I mean, I think they have such a big role to play in society in general. To
Mm,
be honest, I think it's it's always frustrating, watching at times the state of music education in this country, particularly at
yeah.
the lower levels. I mean, when you look at the things that we're trying to do at Monash in terms of embedding more Indigenous content in the curriculum, but also trying to reach out to more Indigenous students.
Mm,
Well, that latter part, the first part is definitely the easier part. Getting Indigenous students is a much harder thing, because to get to the point where you're at a level where you can audition to enter a tertiary ensemble for classical
mm,
music, you have to have had so much time invested in practice and so much
yeah.
support and so much, I guess, in a sense, financial support for
Mm,
lessons. Especially if you can't access them freely, through the public school system.
mm,
There's just it's just so much. I mean, and that's the thing. It's not like there's a real sort of cultural barrier to entry in the classical world. It's just there's a massive need for investment in time and money that just makes it hard to access for everyone.
yeah,
So
those
it's
structural things are so important,
absolutely.
aren't they? And that's that why social policy is also another area that has to go hand in hand, with our artistic endeavors, isn't it?
Mm.
Because it's so structural, as you say. And that's interesting to get your perspective on that. What is your favorite music? Actually, I'm interested to know, what do you like to play or to listen to?
It's yeah, it's funny. I tend not to listen to as much music as I would like at times, just because I'm usually busy playing it
You're busy
or
making it,
doing it.
yeah.
But yeah, it's a really really wide mix of things. Obviously, there's a lot
Yeah.
of classical stuff. I'm
Yep.
really quite partial to things like Sibelius and Mahler and
Yep.
Strauss, Ricard, not Johann. So a lot of the sort of late
Late
19th
romantic.
century
Yeah.
onwards into the modern era, and of course all the experimental music that I sort of come into contact with uh,
Yeah.
through working with Decibel. So yeah, I guess I listen to a broad range of things, but then also occasionally pop stuff as well. Particularly the 80s and 90s are the big big eras for
Yep.
me. I guess
You grew up with
probably
that
shaped
stuff, I
from
guess.
what I grew up with.
Yep. I know the feeling.
Yeah.
Have you ever written music? Do you
I
compose?
have actually. That's definitely been a more recent thing. So
Yeah.
one of the projects that Decibel did during the lockdown was this 2 minutes from home project. So we had 20 short 2 minute pieces, all written for the score player.
Yep.
So all animated graphic notation that we could sort of record separately at home and combine together. And so yeah, we commissioned a whole pile of composers to do it, but also each member of the ensemble wrote a piece.
Yep.
So that was my first time writing for Decibel. And it went actually really quite well. And I've just finished writing a piece for Ensemble Dutala, which we're
Yep.
recording this weekend. For
Fantastic. How
yeah, so that'll
exciting.
be for both a live performance and an installation piece
I
at
see.
the Monash University Museum of Art.
Yep.
So their collected works exhibition, which is curated by Mayor Hodge, who's one of the members of Ensemble Dutala.
Yes.
So that'll be for that. And also, I got asked at the start of last year. Now, once again, yet another of these projects that was sort of extended out and put off a bit at times because of COVID. But to take part in the Narrabooria First Nations Composers Project, and I sort of ummed and ahed a bit about it because it's just like I've got a lot of things that I'm already doing. I don't know if I'm going to have time for it, but ultimately thought, I'll do it. I'll say yes.
Mm.
And so I just wrote a piece for Ensemble Offspring, which was recorded last week in Eugene Goosens Hall in ABC in Sydney. So
Fantastic. So you're busy
yeah,
writing. Sounds
I'm
like you're
very
writing all
busy.
the time.
Thankfully, they're just short pieces, but
Yeah, but still, it's never a short process, is it?
no, it
Creating
really
a
isn't.
piece,
No.
especially notation. And I mean, goodness me, the amount of work that goes into it. That's why I'm always amazed at how composers have the discipline to finish things. It's just that, but putting it on paper is just like, it seems like an endless kind of
And
task.
there are so many times where with like this Ensemble Dutala piece, I had the concept there for ages, and we workshopped it back in January when we had our One Day in January project and all got
Yeah.
together. And so it's the sort of piece that in other circumstances I could probably just notate really loosely, and
Yes.
it could be partly improvised within the ensemble itself. But because we're recording it in individually, so that we
Yes.
can have these video screens with each individual performer on them in the
Yep.
gallery,
Okay.
it means that I've had to sort of actually notate everything out in very minute detail so that
Yeah.
we don't have to because the performers won't be able to hear each other, so there's not that sort of element of spontaneity or improvisation that can occur between ensemble members. So
It's
that was,
very
yeah,
interesting. Yeah, I just get the feeling that you will probably always have this broad front to your career, don't you think? Like, it's
yep.
just who you are, isn't it?
Yeah, and yeah, it's sometimes, I mean, sometimes it's such a great thing because there's so much variety and there are
Yeah.
so many different things I can do. And then other times, yeah, you do feel like you're being pulled in all sorts of directions. And it's like, but I want to spend more time doing this or
Well,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, as I said, I know we got together and have explored conducting
Mm.
and trying to impart whatever wisdom I've picked up over the years and help you. But I immediately noticed that you were very good. Immediately, obviously based on your experiences, but also you've just got a natural talent for it, and that's certainly something that I think you can explore further. And I can't wait to help with that that journey of yours into conducting and doing more as
Mm.
well.
Oh,
So that's really exciting.
looking forward to it. Yeah.
I can't wait. Yeah. So we'll
And
have to schedule another lesson immediately.
oh, totally.
Uh,
Well, and I've got speaking of conducting stuff coming up. I have the M Pavilion song cycle,
yeah. So
the
let's talk,
Woman
because I was
Jacob
going to
song
ask
cycle.
you
Yeah.
what's happening next before we have to wrap up. But tell
Yeah.
us about this. This is the Woman Jekka song cycle, right?
Yeah, so Deborah Cheatham for the past, I think it's 8 years, I want to say 8 years, has been
Yeah.
commissioned to write the sort of the welcome piece for
Yes.
each of the new M pavilions. And so initially, most of the pieces were just the vocal pieces, or they're just the backing track, or so on and so forth. But she's sort of sat down and recently put in the massive amount of work that it takes to orchestrate all of them. And so, yeah, it's a concert of all of these works, and with members of Ensemble Dutala side by side with members of the MSO and Orchestra Victoria, which I'll
Yep.
be conducting. So that's, in
Wow.
fact, that's next. It's come up really, really quickly, actually. That's next Tuesday that's happening at the Melbourne Recital Centre.
Next Tuesday. So when do you start? When do you start rehearsals?
So we start rehearsals on Monday, and then we've got
That's
it
pro level.
totally. So, but, quite full day of rehearsals on Monday
Yeah.
and Tuesday, and then the concert in the evening. And that's coming straight off, as I said, the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, just 2 days of recording for this piece for the
Yeah.
installation.
Oh, how exciting. And that's why conductors are important, to pull things together quickly. I mean, it
Totally.
just saves so much time. Some projects just need one mind to go, this is what we're doing, you know.
Absolutely. Well, it's like I said, I was doing this Summer's Night project just a couple of weeks back now.
Mm,
And one of the pieces by Brie Van Ryk is amazing, great piece, but very a lot of different layers to it, very delicately textured in places, and
mm,
with this audio backing track that sat under it and provided a bass for it, and it's this juxtaposition of the audio track was sort of these recordings from a traffic tunnel
yeah.
in Queensland, and a lot of the parts were sort of these adaptations of various motifs from I can't remember the name of the composer, but a female composer from sort of the medieval Renaissance sort of period.
Hmm.
So it's such an amazing juxtaposition, some very delicate and intricate textures.
Mm.
And, we were a group of very capable musicians, but just trying to it was written in such a way that it's really difficult to get together as a chamber piece.
Mm.
And suddenly you put Brie up in front of the group and just to conduct it, and it just
Yep.
suddenly it's just so transparent, and
Yeah.
you can hear everything, and it just gels so nicely. And it's yeah, there are times where it's like that's when you need a conductor.
Yep. It can be very helpful at times. And so, last question around your work at Monash
Mm.
University. How's everyone going? How are young people going? Because I'm sort of aware that it's been so challenging for young musicians, emerging artists through the pandemic, interrupted studies, interrupted career paths. Feels like there's sort of anecdotally evidence of people abandoning the idea of a career in music. Is that something that you're seeing or not?
I mean, a little bit, but not. I don't think we've seen it too much, which has been
Yeah.
great. Thankfully, it's funny in mentioning that the backdrop behind you is a view that most of my students will be more than familiar with over the past 2 years,
As you're
especially
teaching.
as my
Yeah.
sort of they'll have watched many a sort of ear training video recorded from this exact position.
Yeah.
But no, I think it's been difficult for students.
Yeah.
Especially there are some students who we're seeing now who are coming onto campus for the first time in their third years.
Yes.
Um, and it's a really difficult situation. But I think we had a lot of students initially sort of drop out,
Mm.
but then a lot who came back because I think there was a sort of realization that, well, what else am I going to do? If I put my studies on
Yeah.
hold, it's not like I can go out and get a job or work. Or it's like we're kind of
Mm.
trapped in this sort of limbo anyway.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of, for some of them, it just made sense to keep being at uni and just using the time to really practice. And so, unfortunately, of course, there weren't the performance opportunities.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
but at least there were still a lot of recording opportunities, which
Yep, I did a
can be a
big one with
very
them. We did the
mm,
Eroica Symphony
oh
finale.
yes,
Took
sorry.
ages. Yeah, it was a massive project. It was the craziest thing, but it was wonderful.
I
Yeah.
yeah, I never thought I would ever learn anything about Adobe Premiere, but I am now relatively okay at it after having to put together quite a few, because I inherited the choir at Monash as well at the start of
Oh,
2020,
wow. Okay.
because the previous choir director left.
Yep.
And so I was asked, do you want to take, because I've done quite a bit of singing in choirs over my
Yeah.
time. The most recent, it's been a while since I performed with one. The most recent was sort of back in Perth singing with the Spooky Men of the West, which
Yep.
sort of an offshoot of the Spooky Men's Chorale from over east in the Blue Mountains, and best described as a bunch of weirdos in hats. But so I took over the choir, and we had one rehearsal with 100 people in person, and Deborah Tudum was in as a guest taking that rehearsal,
Yeah.
and we were sort of sharing some of the load of the choir,
Hmm.
and then that was it. Then that's when then that's when
Unbelievable.
everyone was no more on campus time, and
Oh,
yeah, suddenly this choir of 100 that was compulsory for first year oral students went down to a choir of 12. And just trying to teach that online was, over Zoom is just an incredibly hard thing, because basically
depressing.
yeah.
Yeah.
But thankfully they sort of stuck with it, and
Yeah.
said a lot of layering of parts, but we got through quite a few bits of fairly solid repertoire
Yeah.
over the
Oh, well, they're lucky to
period.
have you there helping and leading them through it. I think, that's the one thing all of us have got a great obligation to helping the next generation of musicians coming through, and especially now that they really need our help even more, I think. So, but look, Aaron, this has been fun. The time has just flown by. We have to wrap it up. But I wanted to thank you for talking to me tonight and sharing your experiences and giving people a chance to learn more about you and your amazing, eclectic musical life, and to congratulate you on what you've achieved. I mean, I think it's just amazing. That's the one thing that has been a theme on this Up Late show, where we've talked about the pathways of different musicians. Everyone's got their own.
Mm.
Everyone is different. And yes, a lot of these, we're talking about orchestral musicians, but none have been more varied than yours, you know, and it's really interesting. It's very much your own kind of unique story that you've told so far. And I just feel like you're getting warmed up, Aaron. I just feel like this could just be the beginning of the next chapter in the Aaron Wyatt story. So
Yeah.
and yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing how that all unfolds in the coming years. And I want you to know that your contributions to the MSO as a soloist, as a conductor, and as somebody who, you know, with Deborah can really educate all of us and others through the collaborations that we are able to do together through the orchestra is something that we all value incredibly highly. So a massive thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. And I'd like to thank Tarawara once
Oh yeah,
more for
totally.
keeping us lubricated through this process.
I still have
And
so
I'm
much
going to
left.
exactly. You've got heaps left.
Mm.
I think there's still some in the bottle. Yes, there is. I've just looking at it in my kitchen. Plenty left. I've been very responsible tonight because we start rehearsals for Fantasia tomorrow.
Ah,
Big concert
awesome.
on Saturday. That is a difficult show.
Yeah.
You can do that if you like, Aaron. Actually, that could be your next conducting project. It's not too late. You don't
Amazing.
start work until Monday. You can do the rehearsals tomorrow and concert Saturday. No problem. Good. That's all locked in. But in
Oh,
the
those.
meantime, we look forward to seeing you at a concert soon. The concert experience has been just wonderful to see people back in all of our venues, particularly at Hamer Hall, in big numbers, and the orchestra's playing better than ever. They are really absolutely ripping it to shreds, really playing with incredible commitment and energy and passion, all of the things that make orchestral music so wonderful. So until we see you in the concert hall once more, thanks for watching Up Late with Ben Northey. Thanks to you, Aaron,
Thank you.
and take care. See you next time. Go well.
Thanks. Bye.